Okay. David Leventhal from Pfizer Clinical Innovations is going to be our first speaker. Maybe he'll walk really slowly over to the podium.
Well, not that that actually is perfect.
Okay. Hi, everyone. As Bray said, I'm David Leventhal. I work in our clinical innovation organization at Pfizer in global product development, which is in effect our clinical development organization. I'm going to talk about return on investment from patient input into development programs. I'm going to start off with some work from the Clinical Trials Transformation Initiative. I want to make sure that it gets the proper introduction that it deserves, and Bray had mentioned it earlier. But then I'm going to transition over into some specific work as to how we're applying it within Pfizer in some comprehensive programs, across our organization. So we'll tee it up there. So I wanted to put this out there. This has become the symbology, I think, of the patient groups and clinical trials work that was completed at the end of 2015 through the Clinical Trials Transformation Initiative. And in effect, what is shown here is the opportunity for where patient groups and research sponsors can work together for mutual benefit. And so I would certainly recommend that you all go back and look at that report, and Bray had mentioned it earlier, and perhaps we'll share it at the conclusion of talks today. But you see here there are tremendous opportunities for patient groups and sponsors to work together. I'm going to focus on a couple of things that we're doing inside Pfizer. But as a follow-on to this work, we identified that this was all good stuff, but what is the actual value? What is the financial impact on clinical programs for doing this kind of work? And so that was the next phase of this. We just recently submitted this work for publication, and we're waiting to see the results of that. But I wanted to just tee up, in terms of value proposition, I guess there have been two sort of recent approaches for how to look at it. I'll start at the right. The return on engagement idea. So DIA and Tufts had worked together in doing a retrospective look at what industry sponsors and other research sponsors had done around patient engagement, to retrospectively look at all of those programs and see, through case studies, what the value was of that work. And then there was the work that was done through Citi in a continuation, which was this prospective modeling approach, a look at net present value, expected net present value, and doing that sort of at a program level and looking at it at a portfolio level as well. Just a look at the team members here. It's as you can see, a representation of both industry and academic researchers, and many of the folks who worked on the first paper worked together on the second paper. Just some methods. We applied commonly used methods around modeling of financial value. So these are things that certainly within industry we use all the time in assessing the value of a particular drug compound or at a portfolio level. So things like net present value, ENPV, and we identified, all of the things that we know in terms of, development costs, time, and risks, and those types of things. We use some base cases just in the paper, what a typical phase 2 and phase 3 oncology development program and what the associated costs might be around that. The comparisons, the base case, impacted by patient engagement initiatives, assuming a reduction in the number of protocol amendments and assuming an improvement in enrollment and retention as one of the benefits. And the data that we used is all published benchmark data. We got most of this from SysScript and Tufts, and it's well sourced in the literature. So the drivers of pharmaceutical project value, I mean, these should come as no surprise. Revenue, what are the financial benefits? Cost, both resource and opportunity costs. Time, when do the costs and revenue and risks occur? And can the risk be resolved before a major resource commitment? And then ultimately, the tangible and intangible risks. And all of this is used in the net present value calculation, which is in effect the present value of the revenue of the future revenue stream adjusted for taxes and inflation. And of course, there are numerous risk factors impacting value. So you have the scientific and technical risk, regulatory risk, operational risk, resources, forecasting, and intangibles. So patient health and satisfaction, strategic relevance, precedence, and influencing development decisions. So these risks pull together to create what is expected net present value, which is net present value then factored in the risks associated and each of the potential pathways that a development program could go based on the impact of those risks. Okay, so the model. We kept it very simple. Circles represent studies or other key risky milestones. We assign probabilities based on scientific, operating, and regulatory risks. Each development path has an associated cost or reward expressed as cash flow and net present value terms. And so you can see that, and they terminate as, the treatment being launched or the development fails. Right? And so, in each phase 2, phase 3, regulatory approval, there's these opportunities for your program to fail. We assume this as development, right? So there are a huge number of risks that happen way before phase 2. We did not account for those, but it simply tells the story of earlier on today, the high levels of failure that we see in drug development. And so putting it all together, these were the numbers that we pulled in and brought to bear on this. So you can see that 40% chance of success, 60% chance of failure in phase 2, 60-40 in phase 3, 90 and 10 as you get to regulatory approval, and we've calculated the probabilities and the net present value. So there's an overall 22% probability at launch based on the modeling that we did. And the NPV, given technical and regulatory success, is $400 million. And each of these potential failures have a negative net present value for a regulatory failure and technical failures, in phase 2 and in phase 3. And so there's the math. So this is, basic, just doing the arithmetic where you have a 77 million net present value, adjusted for risk based on this model. We then, after we've established this, and we tried in all of this, and I hope you'll see in the paper, the assumptions are very modest. And we made sure that we were not assuming too much when we came up with this model. So the two areas of the assumed areas, so may lead to avoiding one or more protocol amendments. We know that 70% of phase 2 and 3 trials have at least one amendment. 22% of amendments are due to recruitment. Or feedback from sites or investigators, and a single amendment adds 3 months of time and as much as $500,000 in direct costs to implement. This all, again, comes from the Tufts data, and that patient engagement programs may improve feasibility and ultimately the patient experience. So if you make the informed consent form easier to understand, you simplify the eligibility criteria, you reduce participation burden for patients, and you accelerate study cycle time through startup enrollment completion, that you'll see a benefit. And so I'm going to get through the build here. So this is the drum roll and the results. The net present value impact in the work that we've done here, if you avoid one amendment, It's net present value of 24.5 and 32 million respectively, and the expected net present value, adjusted for risk, 3.8 million and 15 million, and the improvement in patient experience, 38 and 31 million, and 30 and 57 in expected net present value. So this is pretty compelling. So if the first paper told us all the good reasons for working together, and you still weren't able to convince your organization that you should be doing this, you actually now have a compelling financial model, which I think should kick it over the line, at least in my estimation. And I know in my organization and my involvement in this work, it's a pejorative term, but I'll use it. At Pfizer, we felt it was necessary to eat our own dog food, right? We did this, we believe it, and we're going to not just try it out, we're gonna really implement it across the organization. Now, I'm gonna share some examples of us doing that. All right, so in summary, I'm not gonna belabor this. The net present value calculations are compelling. And I think the paper describes some very modest proposals around value, and it doesn't even scratch the surface of all the other stuff, right? So we talked about, simply, what a protocol amendment does, and, what better enrollment and retention potentially does. But you can apply this, and this is just applied, in clinical development. If you're doing this in early development, as folks in rare disease tend to do, if you're discussing with patient groups around the natural history of disease, if you're having those kinds of conversations with patients and patient groups, this is really how we're supposed to be doing drug development. And I think there's a great story here. Now on to what we're doing at Pfizer. So my job is around, so I'm responsible for our patient engagement innovations within global product development. And, I view the world very much the same way as we did in the patient groups and clinical trials work, where pre-study, during study, and post-study are all places where we could be engaging more effectively with patients. A couple of things I'm going to talk about here. So we were talking about the issues with clinicaltrials.gov and why that's not a tenable way to engage patients in research. So we have our own find a trial capability on Pfizer.com where we've simplified the language. We've allowed the teams to post IRB-approved materials that are more patient-friendly, that are more engaging than what's on clinicaltrials.gov. We have a social media policy for clinical development across the entire company that allows us to use social media channels for recruitment and retention, and very clear rules of the road as to how clinical teams should be using that. Live protocol simulations, I'm going to talk about that as a separate item. Our Patients in Global Product Development initiative, it's something that I co-lead within Pfizer. This is making patient engagement real within our organization and making sure that everybody is doing it and it's being measured. During study, we have all sorts of cool things that we're doing around the use of sensors, electronic informed consent, the use of apps for scheduling and reminders, and keeping patients involved in the clinical trial to retain them, make them, feel more engaged, and again, making them want to be part of this research apparatus. And then the last bit, something that I'm personally very proud of, is our post-study activity. PfizerLink, I think, is still the only of its kind patient alumni community that is sponsored by industry. In the United States, we invite every clinical trial participant to join an alumni community where they then can, if they opt in to join, they can then download clinical data that's been collected during the conduct of the study. And as we heard about earlier, we have a program to create lay language summaries for all phase 2 and phase 3 studies in the United States. And of course, this is going to be regulation in Europe starting in 2018. All phases 1 through 4 studies are going to be required to have plain language summaries authored within a year of study completion. And there are many folks in this room that I work with on a Trancelerate effort in doing that across industry so that we're doing it well, doing it in a way that we all feel is complementary and overall good quality. And underlying all of this, we have playbooks, toolkits, policy and guidance, and our external collaborations like Citi and other things that underpin all of this, right? Because you can't just throw this out into a very large organization and expect uptake to really take off. Now, just very quickly, the Patients in GPD initiative at Pfizer, I mean, this is our rollout of patient centricity within clinical development. You know, I was tasked on a series of deliverables. We have to communicate the existing resources, so things like the Citi work, all the various tools that we've seen out in the public domain around patient engagement and why it's important. Bring that all together, vet it, make sure that it's right for our organization, and make it, digestible by clinical teams. Demonstrating the impact. I was tasked to do what we call internally Dare to Try, some Dare to Try programs where there's essentially stretch goals to work with 2 to 3 assets within the organization and actually take these principles and apply them in a clinical program, and then take the artifacts of what we did and bring that back in and make them consumable by everybody else. So the legal agreements that we put in place with patient advocacy groups and patients, we then took those and made those applicable to the entire organization. One of the outcomes that from the PGCT work was we can't get things done because our legal departments don't allow us to do things. This was I think the big rock that we cracked internally was let's have a series of legal agreements that represent two-way non-disclosure agreements, consulting agreements. Does the patient group want to be paid? Do they not want to be paid? How do you onboard them? How do you get them paid in a timely way? And again, make them available to everyone. Identify gaps, make recommendations, keep the cycle going, make it better. And then, success is pretty clear. Teams know how to engage, they know when to do it, they have the tools, and that we're measuring it, right? There are fewer protocol amendments and revisions. We see improvements in retention and compliance, and we're actually surveying those patients and getting to that improved patient experience. And we put up a portal inside the organization, right? So here we so have the roadmap. We're telling them, depending on where you are in the study, what you can do with a patient. We're sharing with them the who, what, and why, how to work with patients, working with advocacy groups, the legal agreements, videos, testimonials from both patients and advocates of the things that we did well and maybe the things we didn't do well, so lessons learned. News, a whole library of things, so we keep all the PGCT documents up there, the net present value work, and under the axiom of you get what you reward, we have an award structure around teams who are doing this and doing it well. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. We have a whole infrastructure around clinical protocol simulation. And this is another linchpin of bringing patients into the clinical development process. It's one thing to ask them what they think of a schedule of activities. It's another thing to actually put them in the real environment and have them experience what it's like in a clinical trial. It's one thing to have a parent want to assent for their child to be in a clinical trial, but not know what it's really going to be like. We've set up, and we have a phase 1 unit in New Haven, Connecticut, my fair city, where we invite patients in to participate in these various simulations. We've done quite a few where we get their feedback on what it feels like to be in a clinical trial, what it feels like to go through an informed consent. Is it too confusing? Can we simplify things? And then feed that back into the clinical team so they can actually make the changes. And so I just wanted to just close with some examples of some things. We did some work with a non-small cell lung cancer program with the Bonnie Adario Lung Cancer Foundation on longevity, where we got feedback, did a protocol review and an informed consent design with them. So just an example, they made a recommendation around the frequency. We sort of had a hyper-vigilant pregnancy screening for that particular program. They recommended that we change it. It was a serum screening, so it was considered invasive. The clinical team was comfortable with making the change. Now, when you start to take it back into the value of this, so you make that one change, and you're affecting hundreds of patients across a particular one clinical site, and then it's over hundreds of clinical sites, the value proposition around getting that feedback and making change becomes very compelling. That means lots of money. And if you decide that you're going to change your pregnancy screening frequency across multiple studies, or if you're going to do these things across multiple studies, you can see that the value is tremendous. Two others. We invited Parkinson's disease patients to come in and interact with dosing materials for a particular clinical trial, and found that they were having trouble pushing the pills out of the dosing card that we were providing to them. That they found the instructions didn't fit back in the box easily for them. That putting it all back together and putting it into the refrigerator was a difficult problem for them. So again, that feedback went back into the team, and they're making meaningful changes, small things. They don't have to be grand gestures. You can do simple things. And I did promise my 13-year-old daughter that I would close with this one. We did do a simulation at the New Haven CRU for our C. diff study, which included a stool collection piece of work where you had to actually interact with the stool collection kit. You had to package it up. You had to call for a courier to come and get it. And we consented these patients. We videotaped them. They actually used chocolate pudding as an analog for the simulation. But we learned so much in this one interaction. We invited in, these patients were over the age of 65. And so, getting stuff out of the package, going through the collection, packaging it back up, and again, making it better, patient-centric. I think that's what we're all trying to do. So with that, I'll end on a poop story, and thanks.
Any clarifying questions for David? We'll come back to general discussion. Yep. The microphone.
So I found the first study that you presented really interesting, but I want to make sure I understand. When you say $77 million and the cost of the development, what size trial are you talking about? Because again, I think this comes back to just my experience in rare disease. I can't even imagine spending that much. So that's why I'm just curious, like what are the parameters that you're even considering as standard?
Yeah, so it's actually all of this is outlined in the paper, but we did do a cross-section from the Tufts and SysScript data of industry-sponsored studies, right? So you're talking about studies that are of a relatively large size. Bray, I can't remember exactly what our number of enrollees were, but we utilized phase 2 and phase 3 oncology studies as as what we used in the paper. So yeah, they were pretty large studies of over between 6,000 and 10,000 patients, and multiple country and multiple site trials. So, and they tend to be that large, but also those are sort of the generalized sales expectation figures of an oncology compound that's coming onto market. So that's how we arrived at those numbers.